This is Caren Skriloff, and they are new to our church, so I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better through our interview session. But the Skriloffs are missionaries to the Jewish people in America, well, maybe even around the world, we'll find out. But they're missionaries to the Jewish people, traveling around, equipping churches, teaching churches how to minister to the Jewish population. So we will go ahead and get started. Caren, what is your background? Let's tell us a little bit about you. I got to read about your husband's testimony, which was very interesting and different, and I'm sure we'll hear much more about it throughout the day. But tell us about you. Tell us where you're from and your background.
Okay. Let's see. I am originally from New Jersey.
Okay.
Central, North Brunswick, which New Brunswick's on the map. So, and I am the oldest of 6 to an Italian-Irish Roman Catholic family.
I see. Wow.
So my father was number 8 in a list of 9.
Wow.
So we spent more time with the Italian side of the family. My mother's Irish side was smaller, but yeah.
Okay.
So.
Nice. And how did you come to know the Lord? You were raised in a Catholic home?
I was raised Catholic up until probably later elementary school. It's where my parents took us when we were younger. I had my, baptism and first communion kind of thing. But then after that, they would start taking us and dropping us. And then eventually, they didn't take us unless we asked to go. And as kids, you're not thinking about those things a lot of times. So it kind of, dragged off for a little, afterwards. But I still had questions about things. My sister Chris, who is younger than me, she's next in line after me, but she wanted to do her confirmation. So my mother and father sent both of us to the catechism classes for confirmation. The nuns weren't happy with me because I questioned too much. I had arguments with them and everything. So one day my parents came to pick us up, and I was sitting on the steps and never sent us back because they wouldn't answer my questions, So, and it was kind of easy. My father was raised Catholic, but my mother converted so they could get married because she was raised, I guess you would say Lutheran, So, yeah. So, but I still questioned some things, and I tried to find answers for myself as a junior high, person. And we didn't have any Baptist churches or Christian, Bible churches or anything in our town. So I didn't go to school with anybody who could answer these questions or whatever. So, and then I met Stan. We met doing community theater. I did behind the scenes primarily, but and he was already saved at that point. And so we talked about a lot of different things and stuff. But with him, if you read his testimony, he got kicked out of his house and went to different churches, but they didn't specify, a church for him to grow in. Mm-hmm. So he didn't really know how to share very well. But then when we were married and we were in Norfolk, Virginia, we were in the military, he heard about a Billy Graham crusade and asked me if I would go. I said yes. And that's where I heard the full story. And I didn't go forward at that point because I wanted to read all the material that they were giving out and everything. And then I accepted the Lord.
And that was important to him to take you to one of those crusades because that's where he
That's
had
where
accepted Christ
That's where he heard.
as
Yes.
a young person
Yes.
as well. Wow.
Yes.
And just for you to know just a little bit, I'm not going to give his whole story, but he was raised an Orthodox Jew, and when he got saved, then he became ostracized really from his
Yes,
family.
he was kicked out of his house and
Yeah.
disowned.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So were you guys already married before you got saved?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, 3 months.
Okay. Okay. So, so you met your husband. That was my next question. How did you meet him? But now we know.
Community theater.
And he was in the military, right?
Not at the point that we met.
Okay.
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 I was still in high school, and he had just graduated.
I see.
And the town I grew up in had community theater. My mother worked in community theater, and so I had to go with my younger siblings and everything. So and watch them while she was working there, and he was working on the same play.
I see.
And then during the summer, the community theater, we did children's community theater.
Okay.
And he worked in it, and I did, and we got to know each other.
Wonderful. Okay. Now I know that, like we said, he was kicked out of his home
Mm-hmm.
for accepting Christ.
Mm-hmm.
How many years have you guys been married now?
50.
50 years. So has anything ever changed with his family all those years? Like, have you been able to
Over the
reconcile?
years, we tried to reestablish relations and everything, but anytime anything was mentioned about church or Jesus, we were done. One year, our daughter was 6 years old, and we went back to New Jersey. Usually we spend most of the time with my family, but we decided we were going to try to connect with his again, and they invited us over. And Sarah never really had like a front porch. In military housing, you don't have a front porch with rocking chairs and everything. Mm-hmm. And they had a rocking chair on the front porch, and she was rocking in the chair, and she started singing, "Jesus Loves Me." And we were gone. Oh. So, but even so, every so often we would try to reconnect, and everything. And as long as we didn't mention, Christ and church or whatever, things seemed to be okay. But if anything came up with that, then it was done. But his 2 sisters, the oldest, Flo, is saved.
Wonderful.
And Toby, the next one, is she will come hear him speak, and preach at different churches. She lives down by Fort Lauderdale. And so whenever we're over on that side and at a church, she'll come and she'll hear, and she asks questions.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Well, praise the Lord. There's
mm-hmm.
that open door.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of, you said your daughter.
Yes,
how many
Sarah.
children do you have?
We have 3.
Okay. Tell us about your children.
Jacob Matthew, Benjamin Mark, and Sarah Elizabeth. We chose the names to connect the old and the new. Their first names are Old Testament, their middle names are new.
I love that.
And we have 2 of them. Jake and Sarah live 10 minutes from us, and Ben is in Iowa.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And do you have grandkids?
7.
Oh, that's nice.
Ben has 4, and Jake has 2, and Sarah has 1.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you. All right. Now, tell us about your husband was in the military. So after you met and were married, he joined the military.
He actually joined 6 months before we got married.
Okay.
But, majority of our life was Army and everything.
So he was in the Army.
He
and
was
you
in the
did
Army.
all the traveling like they do, or no?
His job, not normally. No, he didn't have a normal Army job. But he got stationed at the Armed Forces School of Music in Norfolk, Virginia.
Wow.
And he knew music and he knew supply, and they wouldn't let him go. They kept wanting to keep him.
Okay.
But finally, he was able to get orders to Germany, which we went 2 years to Germany. Well, yes, you did go to Korea for a year all by yourself. So, yeah, they, as a flute player, when he really didn't play the flute that long at that time. You know, he learned to play the flute in Korea.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
and then Germany for 2 years, and then he came back in Fort Polk for his last year.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when he retired from the
Army.
How did God call you into full-time missions, really, as far as missions?
We were doing missions before he even retired.
Okay.
We were doing it while he was active duty. We were invited by a Navy couple in Norfolk, Virginia, when I think we were married like 6 months at that point. We were invited to go to church. And they asked him, and he said, well, I'm married. And they said, well, married people can go to church. So, yeah. So they said he picked up servicemen and women on the base, but we had a car, so we followed the bus and went to the church. And we started working with them, doing what they did, bringing soldiers and sailors, Marines. I think even so we had a few Air Force at one time or another to church. And then they would bring them back to their house and they would feed them dinner. And then after dinner they would have a Bible study and then take whoever needed to go back to the base. Or if those wanted to stay, they could stay longer and go to the evening service. So after 2 years, Bill and Dot retired and surrendered and went to Tennessee Temple in Tennessee. Yeah, 1977.
What was their last name?
Bill
Bill
and
and
Dot
Dot?
Bradley.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
know them very
yes.
well and good friends with them.
Yes,
That's
well,
amazing.
we worked with them,
Wow.
from,
Wonderful.
early on and everything. And then
Wow.
we took over their ministry, from the church, in the church.
Wow.
And then we did that at that point till we went to Germany. Then when we went to Germany, the pastor there, their person who was working with the single servicemen was being transferred and left. So we took that over for 2 years. And then we came back to the States. I had to have back surgery, and we came back at that point. But then he got sent to Fort Polk in Louisiana. He went there by himself because I was still under a doctor's care at that point, so I stayed with my parents in Florida. And then, and let's see, after his year, and he retired, because he kept saying he would never go back to Louisiana. And when I heard him say never, I knew where I was moving. So after a year, he gave in, and we surrendered to be missionaries to the military at Fort Polk. And we did that for 17 years.
Wow. I think it's so interesting. Maybe you don't, you probably catch it too, but I always catch this because I'm the one asking the questions. But I always think it's so neat to see when we start to ask questions like this, and you find out, you say, what led you into missions? How did God call you into missions? We always find out that it wasn't like they were just kind of doing their own thing and living for themselves, and God said, I'm calling you to missions. No, it's usually those who are already serving and active and doing what God's asking them to do on a daily and weekly basis. They're already involved. They're already saying, Lord, I want to serve you wherever I'm at right now. And then God says, now I'm going to use you full time. I'm going to
He takes
let
you a
do
step
this.
further.
That's right. That's right. And I find that so often with missionary interviews that's almost every time the case. So that's wonderful.
Well, I feel that the Lord was training me even before that, because I like I said, a large Italian family.
Mm.
Every Sunday we went to Grandmom's house for dinner. Okay? My father owned a restaurant. I learned to cook with, under him, under my grandmother. And
For a lot of people, too.
And for a lot of people. Okay? So, I mean, at my grandmother's house, we had to have like 3 sittings because there weren't enough seats for the whole family to eat at one time.
Wow.
So people would come in cycles a lot of times. But, I was used to having a lot of people around.
Yeah.
And then when we were initially sent to Norfolk and it was just the 2 of us, and I would cook, I couldn't cook for 2 people. I still have a hard time cooking for 2 people.
Yeah.
Okay, so, because I was trained to
Sure.
cook for large crowds.
Yeah, I love that.
And I mean, I've cooked up to over 30 people for Thanksgiving or
Sure.
20 some on a Sunday.
Yeah. Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more. I mean, I'm hearing a lot now that you did a lot of cooking and
Yes.
there was a lot of people in your home a lot
Yes.
during that ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Was your church for the military in Louisiana, was it on base? Is that
The
where?
church was off base, but primarily military people.
Okay.
Um,
But there were others who came or could come?
oh
you know,
yeah,
open
it was
to
open to
anybody?
anybody.
Yeah.
Civilian, military.
Yeah.
Anybody could come, and even though the majority was military, because primarily there were more military in Leesville, in that area, than there were civilians
Sure.
at that time.
What was one of the biggest
Mhm.
maybe struggles of military missions? Well, like, is that
The struggle with military missions was you get to know people and then they were transferred.
yeah.
Okay, you get to know them and everything, and they become your family.
Sure.
One of the hard things we found when we retired and we came, went back to Sarasota, Florida, and we found a church and everything. When the pastor closed with prayer and everybody said goodbye, they were gone, and you didn't really see or hear from them until next Sunday maybe. Or, you might see him Sunday night, half the group comes back Sunday night, and even less came back on Wednesday. But you would see the rest of them back on Sunday. You didn't really speak to them very much during the week, whereas with military ministry and churches and stuff, they're your family, so you see them almost every day. You either worked with them or you ministered with them in one way or another.
Sure.
So.
At what point when did God make that transition for you all to be done with military, but then to continue in ministry and kind of change it to a Jewish focus?
Yes, Fort Polk was starting to close. They haven't closed completely yet, but they don't have the number of people that they initially had. What did you say? They had 40,000 when he first went there, and a large group, and there's 3,000 there now.
Sure.
So that's, plus the fact that the the chaplains, as well as the officers and stuff, were starting to close down the point where we couldn't visit on the base, unless you were invited by a family that was already there. And so you had to kind of outreach off base to get on base.
Mm-hmm.
And we would make 3,000 cookies between us and ladies in the church, and we would hand them out on holidays. Well, we weren't allowed to do that anymore. you know, where
Sure.
we could, you know, talk to people when we were doing it. You know, so they were shutting things down and cutting off the church's off base.
Sure.
So that was part of it and everything, plus the drawdown from the military at that certain time. It, you know, just, but he also had an injury and everything, and they weren't able to, you know, fix it at that point. And he was having some couldn't climb stairs at the barracks. Different things were medically starting to happen
Sure.
with him, and we were just, you know, praying about it and trying to get the Lord's leading as to what to do. And with everything happening, we felt that it was time to move.
Okay. And
Yes, plus one of the things with him, because people find out that he's Jewish, they want a lot of Jewish stuff.
okay, right.
Okay, so pastors would ask him to speak on Jewish things, and then it ended up being where he would have 3, 4, 5 day seminars on Jewish missions
Sure.
and that kind of thing. And so, but I also felt that the Lord was drawing me into learning more. Now, I had been learning early on about Jewish things, first of
Sure.
all from him, but as well as our kids, you know, that I wanted them to understand his Jewish heritage. So I did a lot of reading on different things, you know, with Jewish things. And so I was learning, you know, some stuff. And when it came time that, you know, I told him with all this going on with him, I was like, well, maybe the Lord is just changing things. And
Sure.
so we resigned as military ministry, and we moved to Florida. And in praying about it and getting the Lord's leading and everything, in my research with Jewish stuff and everything, we found out about IBJM. And I said, with all these pastors wanting you to do Jewish things, you know, and speak on Jewish things, maybe that's the direction the Lord wants you to go. He's moving you, you know, into that. So he called IBJM, and they were excited. They said, we want you to come to our 4-day focus. And at the 4-day focus, they interviewed both of us and wanted to take us on.
Wonderful.
You know,
and how long have you been doing that?
Since 2013.
13.
Yeah.
Wow. And for those of you who don't know, IBJM is the International Board of Jewish Missions.
Yes.
So she's they're working with that mission board to tell us a little bit about your ministry. So you're in Sarasota. Do you have a Jewish ministry where you're at, or you just travel and teach others about that?
We have a Jewish ministry within our church.
Good.
We do Everlasting Nation meetings once a month, and we teach the people within our church how to reach out to Jewish people. You probably have the same thing here, but a lot of doctors are Jewish. And a lot of the church members would always say, my doctor's Jewish, what can I do? What could I say? What could I give them? And so we teach them how to reach out to them. IBJM gives us a lot of material which we can share with people, and some of it is on the table. Within IBJM, we can get Hebrew, English, Tanakhs, which is the Old Testament, okay, and which we can hand out to Jewish people. They're free to Jewish people, so we can do that, and you know, and so we, within our area, he also has reached out to the Jewish Federation, and we are in contact with them. We go to a synagogue several times a year to their services, you know, Purim especially. If you ever get an opportunity to go to a Purim service, you should go. They are really interesting. And then we do Honor Israel services within our church. We're trying to coordinate one right now with the Jewish Federation in our area, where we invite Jewish people to the church and we show them that we love them and we care, you know, and we support Israel.
Sure.
And they just can't believe
That's
it
good.
when they do that, when they see that a lot of times. And yes, and he's been going to a retirement home. Sometimes I'm able to go with him, and he speaks and it's Jewish and Gentile there.
Wow.
So,
Right.
you know, and what was it, right before Thanksgiving, a lady named Shirley accepted the Lord.
I see.
So,
Wonderful. Praise the Lord.
yes.
Good. So you don't know much about me, but I'm married to Pastor Stevens, and he is of Gypsy descent. So
Oh.
his parents and grandparents
Right.
and all the way back. And when we first got married, he had to teach me a lot of things, but his grandmother took it upon herself to teach me a lot of things as a non-gypsy, a Gaiji coming into the culture of what to do, what not to do, things to say, subjects we don't talk about, all sorts of things. And I mean, it blew your mind. Sometimes like, what? How am I going to remember not to say that? Or you know, these types of things. Was it difficult maybe on those occasions when you went to his family? Were there things that he kind of had to tell you ahead of time or tell your kids ahead of time? You know, when you were going to go see them, like, hey, don't do this, or make sure you don't, you know, besides Jesus.
Right. That was the primary one. There weren't too many other.
Not too many cultural things as far as, okay.
No, not that I remember, I don't think.
Okay. Oh, wow, matzo ball soup. We're having that tonight, so we should have had you make it. So we've got a few minutes. We've got about 7 minutes before Sunday school's over, and I want to save some questions for our church members and friends. Yes, Pastor Stevens.
Did you ever have an opportunity, like you mentioned, when you first got married and things, his family wasn't open to the gospel? What about your family?
My family, initially in the beginning, would listen, but always say that, well, that's good for you, you know. But over the years, I've come, you know, in talking to both my parents, got saved before they passed away, so that was a blessing. And my sister, Cindy, is saved, has a relationship. The others will listen, you know. And they understand how everything is with us, you know, whatever. But I've also come to realize that a lot of my cousins that we had tried to witness to early on whenever we would go home, and they would say, oh, that's nice, you know, have accepted the Lord. I have one cousin that's a pastor of a church in South Carolina, and, you know, several of them are attending and everything, which is like, yes, you know, it was a blessing to hear. That was one good thing about Facebook, where I can learn about all of them.
Sure.
You know, so
Good. Wonderful.
that was good. Yes.
Someone else have a question? Yes, Brother Ed.
So, were your husband's parents strong Orthodox Jews, or were they just, just culturally Jewish?
Early on, they were strong Orthodox Jews, and as time went by, it became cultural, more so than anything. You know, doing things because they wanted to look good to everybody else, kind of a thing. Yeah, his real mother passed away when he was 3, you know, and I always looked at it that you know, in everything. If she had still been around, we might not have ever have met, you know, because she was the one holding everything together, from talking to his sisters and learning things from them.
Mm.
So when she, you know, passed away, things changed. And then when his father remarried, it really, you know, went more so cultural than it did Orthodox. Yeah.
Interesting.
That's, yeah.
His grandfather started the first synagogue in Key West. So his grandfather was a rabbi, so very Orthodox at that point.
Yes, yes.
Does anyone else have another question? Anybody? Yes. Please.
Well, I'm just interested as to why, I don't even know if there's really an answer to this, but why there's such a hatred for Christ in the Jewish culture.
I'll address that later.
He said he'll address that in the message. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they're encouraged not to, for one, from early on.
The short answer is, they believe, when you say you're a Christian, they think you're one of the ones that persecuted them. Mostly the Catholics, the Spanish Inquisition, Hitler, etc. That's why the Honor
That makes
Israel
sense.
thing is so important.
They connect, you want to say Christians, the true Christians, with all the other religions that are thrown in Christian.
Sure. That makes sense. All right, we've got like a couple more minutes. Does anybody have another question? Yes, he would like to say. Go ahead.
She asked how we met. Yeah. We did community theater, and we met doing South Pacific.
Are you an actor?
No. I did lighting and backstage set and all that. So we met at a cast party for it. And there's a song in South Pacific. Some enchanted evening, you will see a stranger across a crowded room, then fly to her side and make her your own. Okay, I was sitting at the party with another girl who was not my girlfriend, but was a friend that I knew from school. And across the crowded room,
Was your wife?
there she was. I was 21, and I thought she was 14, and I said, "Stay away." And then she drove after the party. She got in a car and drove. And in New Jersey, you had to be at least 17 to drive. And so I asked my friend, "Who was that girl?" And the rest is history.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for letting us know. All right. Well, it's just about time to wrap this up, so we will be done with our interview. But thank you so much for sharing your story. It was
Well, thank
wonderful.
you
Got
for
to know it a
asking.
little bit more. And we'll learn more about them throughout the day. But they have a table in the back if you'd like to go ask more questions or see more about their ministry. So, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.